my 20s, I was a force kind of leader. I was the kind of leader who thought that aggression was always the way to go. I wanted to win more than I wanted anything else. And people had a term for me in that season of my life. They called me a bully. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Follow2Lead Podcast, a Christian leaders podcast powered by EBEB Solutions, energy benefits for every business. Go to ebebsolutions.com today and learn how you can save actual tax dollars on energy savings, how it all comes together in this perfect capital plan that allows you to take your business a little bit further. Friends, today on the podcast, I'm so excited to give you a framework on how to deal with conflict. Over the next several months, we continue to wrestle with the 12 most Googled leadership questions. This month's question is something I know just wrecks them, and it's all about conflict and how you deal with conflict as a leader. So today we're going to look at Matthew 18 as a scriptural reference. We're going to look at the emotional intensity scale as kind of a tool that you might be able to bring into your thoughts around conflict. And we're going to talk about how so much of conflict is not based off of what you're doing intentionally, but rather how you grew up, things that influenced you, and all that jazz. I'd love to hear your feedback on the episode. You can email me, tony@twmilt.com, and let me know what you think and how you deal with conflict. Now, here's a quick word from our partners, and let's jump into today's episode. All right, let me ask you something before we get into this. Think about the last hard conversation you knew that you needed to have, right? Maybe it was with someone on your team, or maybe it was a teenager, maybe it was your spouse. Maybe it was just a friend that had gone a little sideways. Maybe it was something that had been sitting in the back of your mind for weeks, maybe even longer. And every time it came up, you found a reason to wait one more day. How long did you wait? And what did that cost you? What did that cost the relationship while you were waiting? I've been coaching leaders long enough to know that most of us have a conflict style that we never actually chose. We just kind of developed one. And it's mostly based on what we grew up watching. So how your parents handled conflict, how your first boss handled conflict, how your coaches in athletics handled conflicts. And then we also kind of get these cues along the way. Like, what happened to that important relationship the last time I tried to say something hard? All of that kind of comes together to give you this operating system. And I'm going to bet that you've been running on that same program ever since, and probably without even examining it. So today I want to do two things. I want to help you look honestly at your relationship with conflict, because what you bring into a hard conversation matters just as much as you say. Let me say that again. What you bring into a hard conversation matters just as much as what you say. And then I want to give you an actual practical framework for actually having it well. We're going to spend some time in Matthew 18 because I think Jesus gave us one of the most useful leadership tools in all of Scripture. And most of us have never seen it that way. So today we're going to talk about how to know whether you're actually ready to enter a hard conversation before you do. But let's start with the honest part. Because before we talk about how you want to handle conflict, we need to talk about what conflict does to you as a leader. Because here's what I noticed that most leaders work with. Most of them fall into one of two camps, and both of them have something important to learn. The first camp are the leaders who don't mind conflict. Some of them actually lean into it. They're direct, they're fast, they don't let things sit. There's something genuinely healthy in that. But some leaders in this camp have a harder time going underneath it. You know, conflict gives them something, a sense of control, a rush, an urgency, a feeling of being the one in the room who's willing to say what nobody else will say. And when that's driving you, the hard conversation stops being about the other person and starts being about you. If you love conflict, Here's the question I want you to sit with. Are you solving a problem or are you winning? Are you solving a problem or are you winning? Are you entering into this conversation because it needs to happen or because you want to be the one who makes it happen? There's a difference. And your team can feel it even though they may not be able to name it. Watch for the moment when directness tips into aggression. Watch for the payoff that you might be getting from other people's discomfort. That's not leadership. That's force. And force might get some compliance, but it will never earn trust. In my 20s, I was a force kind of leader. I was the kind of leader who thought that aggression was always the way to go. I wanted to win more than I wanted anything else. And people had a term for me in that season of my life. They called me a bully. And I couldn't have named it then, but looking back on it now, I know that that season of bully was all about protecting myself so that I was in control of the hard conversation. So as you're listening to this, and if you fall into that first camp where you don't mind conflict, or heck, maybe you even enjoy it, ask yourself the question. Are you solving a problem or are you just trying to win? That's the first camp. The second camp are the leaders who hate conflict. Now, most of the leaders I work with fall into this category. They don't want to have it. They intend to have it. They're waiting for the right moment. There's always an excuse on why they shouldn't have it. They have struggled with the right words. They want the version of the other person who might receive it well. It's like, oh, I didn't have that hard conversation today because they forgot their lunch and they were mad, or because they were already late and I didn't want to pile on, or whatever. And the problem with waiting is that what started out as needing a 10-minute conversation 3 weeks ago is now a 6-month problem that actually might take 6 months to fix. If you hate conflict, here's what I want you to hear. Avoidance is not kindness. Avoidance is not kindness. It's not kind, right? I know it feels like kindness. I know you feel like you're doing the right thing. I know you feel like you're protecting the relationship, but what you're actually doing is making the other person pay for the cost of your comfort. You're letting someone stay in a pattern that's hurting them or the team because you don't want to feel the discomfort of the conversation. That's not care. That's self-protection dressed up in consideration. Proverbs 27:6 says this: wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiply kisses. The willingness to have the hard conversation done well and done with genuine care is an act of trust. It's one of the most loving things a leader can do. And the avoidance of it, no matter how it's framed, is a slow tax on the relationship and on the other person's growth. You're basically saying to that person, I don't care enough about you to tell you the truth. Ugh. The healthy posture of conflict is neither love nor hate. It's to see conflict as a tool, something that you pick up when the situation calls for it and you put it down when it doesn't. And it's never used to serve yourself. Which camp do you fall in? Do you run towards conflict and is it about winning? Or do you avoid conflict and is it about self-preservation? So now that we've looked honestly at our own relationship with conflict, you need a process. I need a process. And I want to spend some time in Matthew 18 because I think what Jesus gives us here is more practical than almost anything you'll find in a leadership book. Matthew 18:15 says this: if your brother or sister sins against you, go and point it out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. Read that last line again. You have won them over. Not you have won. The goal is restoration here, not resolution on your terms. That's kind of the frame for the whole process, and it's important. Step one is really simple in the framework. Make it direct and private, just the two of you. And here's what's remarkable about this. Most leaders skip this step entirely. They go sideways first. They vent to a colleague. They loop in a manager. They send an email that copies 4 people. They bring it up in a team meeting that doesn't need to actually be talked about. All of that is a way of managing around the conversation instead of actually having it. Jesus says very clearly, go directly to the person, not because it's comfortable, because it gives the relationship the best chance. The direct conversation does something that no sideways conversation can do. It treats the other person with enough dignity to give them the chance to respond. It says, I think something is wrong between us, and I care enough about you and about us to say it out loud, just to you, before I bring it to anyone else in any other way. Now, if that conversation doesn't land, verse 16 says, bring 1 or 2 others along. And I want to be careful here because this step, what it is and what it isn't, right? This is not about building your case. This is not about showing up with reinforcements. Jesus says, bring witnesses, people who can speak honestly to the situation and keep both of you accountable to the process. In a leadership context, that might be an HR partner, a trusted peer, someone who knows you both and has no stake in the outcome. You're not bringing an ally. You're bringing a witness. There's a big difference. And if that doesn't resolve it, verse 17, it goes a little wider. It says, take it to the community, to the organization, to whatever the appropriate structure is. But notice the sequence. Private conversation first, witness-supported conversation second, structured escalation last. Most of the organizations that I talk to do this in reverse. They go straight to structure and skip the steps that might actually fix the relationship. And then they wonder why the formal process leaves everyone feeling worse, even though the issue technically gets resolved. The framework that Jesus gives us is restorative in every way. Every step is designed to give the relationship the best chance to survive. That's not soft leadership. That's wise leadership. And it comes from Jesus, not a consultant. But here's what Matthew 18 doesn't tell you: what to do with yourself before you walk into the room. And I tend to think that that might be the most important part. As the leader who's bringing the conflict into the dialogue, you have to show up in a certain kind of way. This is where I introduce something that I use with my clients, and it's called the emotional intensity scale. If you have listened to this podcast for any length of time, this comes from my latest book, Wisdom in the Wound. But it's all about emotional energy, right? And we know that on an emotional intensity scale from 1 to 10, anytime your emotional intensity is above a 6, it's always more about you than it is the other person. It means that if you're getting ready to go into this conflict and you're all hyped up, if you're at a 7, an 8, or 9 in emotional intensity, you're not in a place to have the conversation in a healthy way. It means that you're so locked into the thoughts and feelings of winning or the conflict or everything else that you can't look at this situation with empathy and curiosity or restoration the way that Jesus meant it. As a leader, you have to make sure that you're in a good place. And sometimes that means reaching out to a trusted peer or coach and talking through not what the person did, but your part in all of it. I have a friend who calls me and he says, am I coming in too hot? He wants to know if I'm actually, or if he's actually at a place to have the dialogue, or is he still too emotionally wrapped up in it? One of the realities for me is that sometimes I don't know when I'm being a little too intense. And so before I go into a hard conversation, I really have to think through what's involved in it. And then once your emotional intensity gets back below that magic number, gets below a 6, that's where Matthew 18 step 1 belongs. You go directly, privately, from a place of genuine care for the person and genuine belief that the relationship can survive what you're about to say, and you have the hard conversation. And so there's a practical question that you just have to ask before every hard conversation. Where am I on the emotional intensity scale right now? Honestly, not where do I want to be, but where do I think I am actually? Not where I should be. Where am I? If the answer is below a 6, then um, you can actually take time to go and have the conversation. If you're above a 6, just wait. No good's going to come from it. Take a walk, pray, call a friend, journal, do whatever you need to do to get yourself regulated and grounded before you go in. This is how you avoid what some people call the speedboat effect. The leaders who run into conflict or who are moving so fast, they're like a speedboat and their wake just does damage that they never actually see. Get below a 6. Get focused on what you actually need to say and that it's not about winning, it's about restoration. Get below a 6 and know that you can have the conversation and you'll be okay. So let me bring this all the way home. Here's what I know about leaders who handle conflict well. They're not the ones who love it or the ones who hate it. They're the ones who take it seriously enough to do the internal work before the external conversation. They know that they bring their whole selves into the room. And they've developed the process and they check themselves at the door before they walk through it. Your team, heck, your family is watching you in the moments more than you know. They're not watching you alone in just your strategy sessions or your vision casting. They're watching what you do when it's uncomfortable, when there's tension that nobody's naming, when somebody drops the ball and everybody's waiting to see what you're going to say to them. They're watching how you hold people accountable. How you handle those moments tells your team everything they need to know about whether or not they're safe with you as their leader. Remember that Proverbs verse. It says, the wounds from a friend can be trusted. The hard conversation done from care, done with a real process, done from a ground in place is one of the most trusting things that you can offer someone. It says, I believe in you enough to tell you the actual truth. I believe in this relationship enough to do this the hard way instead of the easy way. You're worth not taking any shortcuts. So here's the question I want you to walk out with today. Is there a hard conversation you've been waiting to have? And what is it costing the other person because you haven't had it yet? Check your emotional intensity. Go to Matthew 18, read it all again. Use your framework and have a private and direct conversation with the person. Honestly, you both deserve it. Well, friends, that's our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed this dialogue. I'd love to hear your frameworks on conflict. Shoot me an email, tony@twmilton.com. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear how you handle conflict. And hey, if you need help with conflict management or if there are relationships on your teams that you're struggling with, don't hesitate to reach out. It's exactly the kind of coaching that I do. And I love to walk alongside growth-minded leaders just like you. I'm forever thankful for you, the bold ones. Our community means the world to me. And remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.